security in the Baltic Sea region. We have the honor and the privilege to host the Prime Minister of Estonia, Ms. Kaja Kallas. Estonia is a country which is both part of NATO and the EU and also has long relations and deep ties to Sweden. Warmly welcome. The last few months have been game changers for the security and the stability in the Baltic Sea region and in Europe as a whole. Russia's attack on an illegal full-scale invasion on Ukraine is not only an attack on a sovereign state and democracy, it is also an aggression on the European security order itself. As a result of this, Sweden and Finland have decided to apply for membership in NATO, and simultaneously the EU toolbox is being developed to better face the different volatile and uncertain geopolitical circumstances. Today we will discuss these issues. As I mentioned, we have the privilege to have the Prime Minister of Estonia, Kaja Kallas, and we also are very happy to have Jakob Hallgren, the Director for the Swedish Institute of International Affairs, and Mr. Göran von Sydow, the Director of the Swedish Institute for European Policy Studies. Welcome.
Thank you.
We will discuss the changing security environment in the light of Russia's aggressive and revisionist policies and how we may tackle this together. To start the seminar, I would like to ask our guests to give a short opening remarks on the current situation and share your thoughts with us. Please, would you like to start, Mrs. Prime Minister?
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. First, thank you for having me, and it is true that we have very deep ties with Sweden. We have been part of Swedish Kingdom, and those times have been referred to as the good old Swedish times. But it might be because the comparison with the Russian occupation was to your benefit. But anyway, this is true that we live at the moment where the aggression has come right to the EU's borders. And the warning signs were long there. Yet it still caught many by surprise. What we are witnessing now is not only a personal war by Putin, but an aggression that is much more deeply rooted than in Russian attitudes to geography, but also to history. When the Soviet Union collapsed, then the imperialistic dream of Russia never did, and the Russian imperialism never did. While the Nazi crimes have been widely condemned in the world, communist crimes never were. These mass crimes of Russia, repressions by the Soviet regime, were never investigated, condemned, and regretted in Russia. In Estonia, all the school books were rewritten to reflect the history as it actually was. But it was not done in Russia. And the Soviet war criminals were tried in Estonia, for example, but they were never tried in Russia. And instead, Putin has built this strong revival of Stalinism, support for Stalin. So 70% of Russian people support Stalinism. If people admire dictators, there is no obstacle of becoming one or submitting to one. So what will stop this aggression? Can the free world really step against it? This is the question that I am often asked. Just a few comments on this. As it's widely clear now, Russia is the most direct threat to the world order as we know. Its goals and ambitions have not changed over the times because the aggression has never been pushed back or punished for that matter. We need to focus on pushing back the aggressor and drying up the war machine. We need also to make a leap in our own defense, and I'm glad to see that Sweden is making huge step in this regard. What Ukraine needs right now is the arms to fight back the tyranny and fight back the aggressor. So we have to do everything to help Ukraine win. Military aid is the best humanitarian aid we can give to Ukraine today. And these were the words of Ukrainian parliamentarians when we met just a few weeks ago. Another question that is often asked, what is victory really? I think it's very important that it's solely up to Ukrainians to define. We must help Ukraine to get best positions to negotiate with Russia. But here I'm really worried about the premature calls for ceasefire and peace. No sign is there that Russia has changed its aim or calculus in this matter. So I'm asking, what is that if we make Russia sit at the negotiation table, and are they really in good faith? And I don't think they are, because the negotiation tactics that they have had long already from the Soviet times is that ask something that has never been yours and do not give 1 inch in negotiations. And if you go back to the Security Council meeting that Putin had, then there Dmitry Medvedev said that, by no time all these people in the West will be back asking us to be back at the table, and everything is forgotten. So we must avoid a bad peace. A badly negotiated peace for Ukraine would mean a bad peace for us all. And what does it really mean? It means that the aggression pays off. You have still gained some territories, and then you go to business as usual, and then there's a pause of 1 year, 2 years, and everything will continue. So this is very important that we equip Ukraine so that it can negotiate with Russia from the position of strength. And we must make sure also that economic concerns will not lead to appeasing the aggressor. Clearly, the sanctions are hurting us as well, but it is the resilience of the society shown how much pain you can really endure. And this is, I think it's much more dangerous giving in to Putin than to really provoking him, if that could be considered provoking. So all these seemingly small concessions to the aggressor lead to big wars. We have seen, we have done this mistake already 3 times. Georgia, Crimea and Donbas, thinking that, okay, now there's peace, everybody stays where they are, and Russia has gained some territory, so let them not move on. But there is a pause, and then everything will continue. Yes. And finally, I think there should... Sorry. Sorry. We should not return to business as usual with war criminals. I mean, I've been saying that why everybody wants to talk to Putin. If you look at the international law and the definition of genocide in the international law, then it says that genocide is your will to basically wipe off a nation or part of the nation and act accordingly. This is what we see happening in Ukraine. Putin has not any way hidden the obstacles that they have. So this is clearly the case. So if we go back to business as usual, Putin is counting on this. This is the way they operate. If we give this in, then we are definitely weak. And the unity of the free world is a key to really stand up against the aggression next door. So, I mean, the biggest question to us all is how can we really sustain this? We already see the cracks in in the unity when it comes to, the sanctions. When it gets harder, then it's also harder to keep the unity, but we have to strive for this. And it has been a negative surprise to Putin because he doesn't believe in multilateralism. And so far we have managed to keep this. So sorry to be being a bit long.
Thank you very much, Ms. Prime Minister. Then I would like to ask Jakob Hallgren to continue. Would you share your thoughts with us?
Thank
please?
you very much, Maud, Prime Minister. Many thanks for those very pertinent and powerful comments and overview. Well, it has indeed been a turbulent winter and spring for European peace and security. Russia's illegal and unprovoked invasion of a friendly neighbor, a P5 country, mind you, using the threat of nuclear weapons, and before that, ultimatums that were communicated last December have changed so much. I think Finland's President Sauli Niinistö expressed it succinctly when he said that Russia previously wished for Finland and Sweden to be non-aligned, but that they since December require us to be so. So there is simply no place for non-aligned countries in our part of the world any longer, sadly. In Sweden, the case for NATO membership have grown over time, but since Russia's invasion and the cruel ways in which this has been done, mindsets have shifted, and it has become a clear majority position to support Swedish membership. I think that Russia's complete disrespect for human lives, the complete disdain of other countries' borders, and their legitimate right to chart their own paths when it comes to national security was quite shocking, even though the signs, as Prime Minister said, have been there for a long time. So within Swedish security policy circles, and many of the peers and the nestors are here today, it has always been said that in case either Finland or Sweden would one day consider joining NATO, we need to give each other at least 24 hours notice. I think that this is another way of saying that Sweden and Finland have always been very closely linked by history, culture, and modern day defense collaboration. So when it became clear that Finland was seriously considering joining NATO this spring, it added, I believe, an important impetus in Sweden to the fear and the anger we all felt regarding Russia's behavior. So now the joint application is made and we're in a new situation. Sweden and Finland joining NATO and thereby both strengthening the possibilities to defend the Baltic region more effectively, and secondly, I believe illustrating how badly the Russian leadership's gamble has backfired, are strong reasons why this expansion of NATO is so welcome. So this said, as we are, as you all know, currently experiencing some problems with Turkey, which I hope will be overcome. So apart from the obvious possibilities to enhance the military security in the Baltic region, this NATO enlargement, I think, also opened very interesting possibilities for stronger Nordic-Baltic collaboration and cooperation. I'm sure that it will also affect the way we work together in the EU, maybe the way we see the development of EU defense collaboration, and then also the way we address an array of global challenges, including, for instance, the rise of China. But I think it's also clear that this rapidly changed role for Sweden will mean that some reassessments will be made when it comes to traditional Swedish foreign policy priorities. As we all know, only 2 weeks ago, the debates were intense in Sweden before the agreement was made to apply. So could Sweden continue its traditional roles, mediation in crisis, pushing for nuclear disarmament? What about global commitments? So what will it do to Sweden's self-perception to be in this military alliance? It's after all more than 200 years of more or less consistent policy as first neutral and then non-aligned, even though the collaboration has been very close for the last 25 years with NATO. Now, I do think that the support is very strong for the course taken, and that there is a clear-eyed wish to work even more strongly for collective peace and security in our neighborhood in more formalized ways. Because, as Prime Minister said, the sober reality is that we didn't, at least not in Sweden properly, at least not the majority, realize the magnitude of how different the Russian worldview is, and that we didn't stop their ambition when they first emerged in Georgia 2008 and onwards. So the joy that many of us felt who were young in the late 90s was unfortunately, as we all know, not shared in Russia. So the problem now, in the short and in the medium term, is that we cannot have a shared understanding with Russia, and that we unfortunately need to keep quite a hard border with Russia. In the longer term, we of course need some time to start thinking of our eastern neighborhood and how to somehow support whatever liberal and democratic forces there might be in Russia, but that is unfortunately very far away today. So meanwhile, as I think Prime Minister put very clearly, the outcome of the war in the Ukraine will determine the future of European peace and security and the security order that we will have. The silver lining of this is, of course, the unprecedented unity that we have seen across the Atlantic, in Europe, and now in the Baltic region. Both EU and NATO have been given a clear new sense of purpose, and I think the willingness to stand up for the values we believe in are stronger than in a very long time. Now, our challenge will be to keep that unity for the sake of our long-term peace and security, apropos calls for early ceasefires, etc. And I think Estonia is really one of the countries which have had a clear and consistent voice regarding Russia for a long time, and you have been proven right about the risk that some of us disregarded, I believe, for too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hallgren. Then I would like to ask Göran von Sydow.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for the invitations, and thank you, Prime Minister, not only for your intervention here, but also the clear leadership in these difficult times that you show. Now, I would like to depart from democracy. And why that in a context where we're talking about security? Well, one is the obvious reason that democratic states tend not to invade democratic neighbors. And it's also true that democracy is also a guarantee for stability and security. Estonia, Prime Minister's country, is one of those countries that actually have become a very stable and highly ranked democracy over the last 3 decades. However, and unfortunately, this is not true across the globe. In fact, when the VDEM Institute, an institute of Gothenburg University that measure democracy across the globe, when they now make their survey of last year, it shows that the share of the world's population living in democracies are now back again to the levels of 1989, which means that the last decade has actually meant that all of that development we saw in the first decades after the end of the Cold War is no longer there. And why does this matter? Well, first of all, autocracies are more prone to go to war, for reasons that only they perhaps can tell why that is. But it's also true that while the response vis-à-vis Russia in relation to this invasion has been very firm, among many states, we also need to remind ourselves that it's primarily the democratic world that has managed to do this, give this response. And the fact is that it still looks different. So this is also a warning to us that we're perhaps living in slightly new times, and that we witness more clearer than ever before just today. And it also calls for some reflection perhaps of what we expect of how we can transform the world. We have had decades where we believe that increasing globalization, interdependence, and trade and exchange would naturally lead to a sort of convergence towards a Western model where we combine markets and democracy and rights and rule of law. However, maybe we neglected certain aspects when we believed that trade would also lead to change. And we need to face to that now, I think. When what we do now also is reflecting on our own vulnerabilities and how to secure, to get rid of those bad dependencies that we also tend to have for our states. And therefore, I think this crisis has also perhaps pushed a little bit an agenda within the European Union that has already been undergoing, which is to talk about how to make Europe protect itself better, how to, be it if you phrase it in terms of strategic autonomy or other phrases, it's the notion that we are exposed to certain threats and we need to look after how we do this. Now again, I think the European Union's response has been very swift, very firm, and also innovative in certain respects. We have taken measures that we did not really foresee, and this has to do with the fact that it's a symmetrical crisis in a sense that we initially, at least in the European Union, perceive this threat in a quite similar way. Now, the risk, which also Prime Minister alluded to, is that as this time passes, we also see the differences and it becomes a bit more asymmetric in its effect inside the European Union, which also makes it more difficult to agree where we need to agree in order to take new measures. And here I would also like to point to, in the European Union, the role of the institutions. 2.5 years ago, the European Commission took office and they claimed to be a geopolitical commission. There were a few eyebrows raised about what exactly does this mean, but I think the current crisis and perhaps also the COVID pandemic has shown that indeed the European Commission has become a geopolitical commission, and it's the groundwork that is prepared by the Commission that also provides the basis on how we can agree on certain measures, such as the sanctions. So that's worth remembering. At the same time, as mentioned by both speakers previously, there's also been great unity across the Atlantic. And of course, the current administration in the US has helped to that end. One needs only to consider the alternative and what that would have meant for the European Union. Now, Sweden and Finland are set to join NATO, it seems, and that means that the whole Nordic-Baltic region will be NATO members, as was mentioned by Jakob. That provides, of course, also good basis for increasing and strengthening the Nordic-Baltic cooperation. It also means that there is a even stronger overlap between what the EU is and what NATO is. However, and we can come back to that in the discussion, perhaps there has been always a discussion about risk of duplication or competition. To my mind, I don't quite see it as that, but I think these are two distinctly different organizations with different purposes and different tools at their disposals, and they should both be used in the best way possible. Denmark is also, actually, as a side note, Denmark is next week set to have the referendum about joining the EU's, or getting rid of the opt-outs when it comes to security and defense. So there is more unity in this respect. We're now only waiting for Norway to join the EU. And then but here I would say, and there is a good hope for increasing Nordic-Baltic cooperation within NATO, but perhaps also a word of caution is that we are indeed EU members already. And while we tend to agree on many things, we tend to look at the world in similar ways, it's not always that this Nordic-Baltic cooperation, collaboration inside the European Union has taken us much further than that. So my appeal here would be to strengthen that, but also remember what we can do perhaps even more inside these various organizations. And just to come back to where I started, democracy is one point. If you look at this VDEM measurement that I talked about, actually of the top 8 democracies in the world, 5 of them are in the Nordic-Baltic region, Estonia included. So that, if nothing else, could be a good point of departure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, all 3 of you, for sharing our thoughts. Ms. Prime Minister, you would like to add something?
Just a few comments. Democracies, I totally agree, and I also think that it's very important to understand why Russia is taking this up, really. It is not because they really need those territories, but because the fight is about democracies. This is what Putin is afraid of, because in democracies, governments are held responsible for what they do, because you have elections every 4 years. So if I do decisions that my people don't like, I'm not elected back, and that's the way it is. My power is not internal. And the second thing is that in democracies, the states should deliver for the people. But in autocracies, the states should deliver for the dictator and the cronies around him, and the army, because you have to keep the army and the police happy. So these are the forces that keep you in power. And that's why this is what they are really afraid of. And all the moves have been made. If Ukraine wanted to choose the democratic path, we're going to make such a mess that you are not going to get there. This is what we have to keep in mind. The other thing, what you also mentioned, the connections and the dependencies. there's a very good book about this, The Age of Unpeace, about those connections and how the other side of the connection can also hurt you. So make sure that you're connected or dependent on friends, because if you're not, and this is clearly what we see in terms of gas, for example. The Nord Stream pipeline, we have said all along, I mean, from the start, we have said that this is a geopolitical project, not an economical one. But unfortunately, we were not listened to. And coming to your point, not only a geopolitical commission taking up the geopolitical role, but I think the European Union has become really truly the geopolitical union that we have been thinking about, or could be the geopolitical power in this case, if we don't really mess it up and we keep the unity as long as it is possible.
Thank you, Ms. Prime Minister. I would like to go back to the changes that all three of you have mentioned. The first change in 1990, where the Soviet Union fall apart, and the other change in 2008, which most people realized in 2014 how bad it was. There was a hope for, in 1990s, it was a hope for Russia to become more democratic from a lot of people around, but it did not succeed, obviously. Putin came in power and had other ideas. What are the possibilities for a good negotiated peace with Russia, and that will result in Russia becoming something else than it is today? That's a $10 million question. I'll ask you.
Yeah, but there are parallels in history that you can draw. I mean, as I said, the Nazi crimes were widely condemned in the world, and for that actually Germany feels really bad, and that's why they have the bad conscience about this. The whole nation, not only the leaders, but the whole nation, so that it could never repeat itself. But as I said, the communist crimes were never widely condemned, and this is something that we definitely can't let Putin get away with, so that the whole nation would think about the pain caused and the atrocities, and whether, you know, if all of this energy would be put into building up Russia, really, how much more could the people benefit from this? But of course, Russia is a very difficult country and nation in a sense, so that it's not a short-term issue. When we go back to 1990s, then I mean, when we started our negotiations for NATO, then I remember very well, because my father was also one of those who was dealing with it, and he got this question a lot, that why do you need this? Russia does not pose a threat anymore. It's like, no. We know our neighbor. And we use this opportunity window, because if we wouldn't be in NATO right now, we would be living through some very dark times right now. But because we are under this NATO umbrella, we are not. So first thing regarding Russia is that the aggression cannot pay off. The war crimes have to be prosecuted and punished. Clearly, the message Russia has to pay for destroying Ukraine, so that there has to be reparations in terms of using the arrested assets, or also asking them to pay for what they have destroyed, so that the message would get through, and then you can go on talking to Russia, and if they have tried to make all of this pain go away, then you could take them back to the table as equals, I think.
Thank you. And I will ask the question then to Göran. What should the long-term relations between the EU and Russia be after all this is over, and depending on what the outcome is, how can we tackle Russia?
It's indeed a very difficult question, I think. And I think there is, I guess there are two, it depends really on the outcome of this war. I mean, it will matter so much how this will end, what kind of strategy one could employ, and with what kind of time perspective that should entail. But obviously, I mean, it's also, we have to remember that however the war ends, geography will still be the way it is, right? So Russia will be a neighboring country, and we need to find ways to deal with it. If in the case of a situation where there is indeed a regime change in Russia, which would be necessary for that long-term perspective, then I guess it would also require lots and lots of commitment on behalf of the European Union in how to rebuild society, economically, politically, with the institutions, etc. So that commitment in Russia.
Yeah.
So it's just to remember, and that responsibility will also be for Ukraine in a long-term commitment from the side of European Union. I don't see, I'm not going to go any further into how this is to be done, because again, it relates to what kind of peace there will be.
Of course. Jakob, Hallgren, Russia is, if the comparison to Nazi Germany, the big difference is that Russia is not occupied. So it doesn't have the same possibilities, or the winners doesn't have the same possibilities to dictate the conditions, perhaps like in Germany. But what would you say would be the bilateral or the Nordic-Baltic relation to Russia afterwards?
I think we're seeing a revival of the very clear-eyed views that we've had of Russia over the decades in Sweden, which were maybe a little bit confused the last 20 years and in the 1990s. And as I said before, we need to be clear-eyed about that. And this is what my colleagues my Russia experts are saying. We need to be clear about the trajectory of whatever happens after a possible regime change are currently extremely bleak, as Prime Minister just said. So we need to get used to the idea that we have a Russia with a completely different world view. I did say that we still, of course, have to think and to start to develop some kind of a policy of how democratic and liberal forces could be supported once they re-emerged. But currently, I think the outlook is relatively bleak, and I think this is ultimately one of the reasons why Sweden has joined NATO now, because it's a mix of anger and fear to some extent that there was for some time a belief that they would accept, but that is not any longer the case. So in that case, I think all of the Nordic and the Baltic seems to have aligned themselves. Now, if I may add, I think one problematic challenge here is that the unity that we are talking about here today, which is shared, well, there might be discussions within Europe and transatlantic, how far we should go, and that unit is not. But the problem is that is not shared in the wider world. We have China as the very powerful supporter of Russia, without whose consent I do not believe that Russia would have had the self-confidence to do what they've done. And if you're looking at other countries in Southeast Asia, South Asia, Middle East, Africa, Latin America, etc., there is a different view on these things. And I think it's important to remember that we need to reach out and to discuss this wider in the world, because we are more and more becoming we're ending up in a very bipolar worldview here. So what we're doing in the Nordic Baltic is important vis-a-vis Russia, but the more global views and outreach is extremely important as well, I think. Yeah.
But still in UN, the Russian aggression was condemned by
Sure.
vast majority of countries. Not only it's not 50-50.
But it was quite fragile, unfortunately, that majority, as I understand. So
no, that wasn't fragile. That was, I think, 9 countries out of I don't have the numbers, but it wasn't fragile. It was over 2/3 majority.
No, you are, of course. I just heard that some of these countries had to be convinced and so on. So, but and the narratives we're hearing in some parts of the world. But I agree, and this is just like in the Human Rights Council. The support is solid, but this also needs to be taken into account. I believe.
Göran for Sydow.
No, I just wanted, in conjunction, something that Jakob mentioned already, is that actually in relations to Russia and also this crisis, and also in combination with the strong leadership of persons like Prime Minister Kallas, it has also already shifted the attention and the balance, I think, within the EU's thinking about external affairs. So in relation to this perhaps more nuanced picture of what is happening in Russia, I think this also goes for many of the member states that didn't really mind. I mean, it wasn't really on their agenda. I think this worked together with the sort of analysis made by, let's say, Baltic and Nordics and perhaps also Central Europeans. It has already affected the way the EU is thinking. For instance, in the strategic compass, the kind of sort of problems that we're looking at. And that provides also the basis for more common capacity and actions in the EU, because we need to remember, I think, in the longer term, now where there's a very strong and well-functioning transatlantic link, but there is no absolute guarantee that this will work the way it does in the future. And therefore, Europeans will need to take more responsibility and will need to think more about its neighborhood in these contexts.
Thank you. Ms. Prime Minister, you are, as mentioned, a strong leader and have been very clear on your support to Ukraine. When Sweden and Finland's membership in NATO is agreed, and we're all members of EU and NATO together, what can we do together for a better relation with Russia? And it's up to you what a better relation is.
Yes. First of all, I must say I really admire Sweden and Finland for making such big steps and in such a short time frame. And as it was mentioned, this is clearly, made the difference. Really, Russia has achieved something opposite that they tried to achieve by trying to pushing all the countries away and really threatening the countries as well to make their own choices. Of course, when we are in these unions together in the defense alliance of NATO and European Union, I think we share very many common positions. And clearly, for us, when it comes to the Baltic countries, then in terms of NATO, we are not the peninsula anymore. So that definitely means the strengthening of the whole region, the Baltic Sea in between, and also we are not dependent on the help coming from the Suwalki Gap that can be closed very well and easily by Russia, but the help can come also from the north, which is a great thing. If I'm talking about our own defense, and we have already done very many things together. I mean, military exercises. We have right now a military exercise going on, and the Swedish and Finnish forces are there as well practicing. And this is all about practice, because what I think we should do right in order to avoid Russia even thinking about aggression towards any of our countries. What we should do is to show that we are boosting our defense, and we are also showing this, that it is strong, we are not afraid, and if you make a move on us, we will show you so that you will regret this. So I think this is very important, that we don't hide how strong we are in this regard, because that is a deterrence that keeps the aggressor off. But how to build the relations with Russia? Different countries in the Nordic Baltic region have had a very different attitude towards Russia. I mean, Finland, for example, has long had a totally different relationship than any of us, I think. And it was very interesting for me to listen when the aggression or the war started. Actually, the war started already 8 years ago. But on the 24th of February, then to hear the Finns that actually we have been trying to be really, polite and not to provoke and not to do anything, and we have given some territories to Russia, and now we see this happening in Ukraine, and that opens up all the wounds that also Finland has and all the fears that they have regarding Russia, although they have never said it publicly. Now the question to the future is whether we see the future in a common way, or we also see when our own defense is more secure, we make the steps to appeasement. And here our histories are completely different. I mean, we were occupied for 50 years. And Sweden and Finland were not. And that's the different perspective. So we had peace after the Second World War. But the atrocities, the mass deportations, the killings of people started when there was peace. So we have to keep this in mind, that the aggression can't pay off. We have to keep this line that war criminals have to be tried and have to be also held accountable what they have done. And of course, when that is all clear, we can move on to having normal relations again, like it was after the Second World War with Germany, that matter.
Thank you, Ms. Prime Minister, and thank you, Mr. Hallgren och Mr. von Sydow. I'm afraid that our time has run out. We had one question, but I unfortunately will not have time for, because I know the Prime Minister has a busy schedule. I think your last words very well explained why you have said before that peace is not enough. Thank you very much for coming and taking your time to be part of this seminar. To all three of you, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So,